Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks on a rather chilly Saturday morning here in Glasgow. And today we're going to bring you our recording of the leadership hustings for the ALBA party. But first, let's turn to our show last week and your amazing response. We had Colin McInnes of Homeless Project Scotland telling us about the great work he's doing for our homeless people in Glasgow and beyond. Let's hear some of what he had to say.
Our main priority are obviously families and children. We have families and children who come and use our shelter. We have mothers that turn up with their trunks and their children. They maybe have domestic abuse, they may be in a state of fear of living where they are, and the first place to come is our shelter. It takes me back to memory of a woman actually on Christmas Day who walked the streets with her baby in a pram for 6 hours, came across our shelter, and we supported that lady through accessing the social work services to get her into accommodation. Now, that accommodation was a hotel room with a bed, no facilities to cook for her baby, no facilities to heat her baby's bottles up, no facilities to fend as a human being to look after her child.
Why is that the case, Colin? Why is the system failing these people?
Because the system does not care. Politicians have just become absolute maniacs. They're all interested in politics, they're not interested in humanity. People who are in politics right now, in charge of this country, have forgotten about the people of this country. And they're concentrating on money, budgets, and arguing in parliaments, and not actually concentrating on the mother who's pushing the pram in -1 conditions.
And can I thank you all for your tremendous response to Colin's interview. Greg MacArthur says, the actions of Alex Salmond, who visited the Homeless Project 3 times, not just his words, showed the measure of the man of the people and for the people. Shame on the pretenders who hold our country in contempt whilst wearing the rank of First Minister of Scotland. Louise Hogg says, well done for giving this man the opportunity to be heard. And so true, when the roots of a tree are rotting, the tree is dead. Geronimo says, heartbreaking. Colin's passion comes through. What a saint. I'm no politician, but how would the homeless problem be helped? How do we support the issues? Obviously, it's a symptom of a much wider issue. The Scottish Government really needs to get involved and back this charity up. John Tierney says, another great podcast. Molly says, thank you for what you do, Colin. SN for RFS said, these videos are always excellent. James Fennessy says, brilliant as usual. Everyone deserves a voice and recognition, especially the homeless. John Tierney comes back to say, not surprised that Alex Salmond did his bit. Sorely missed. Wish he was still with us. John Tierney also goes on to say, I'm so glad you gave a platform for Colin on the podcast, Ismina. And I'm also glad those politicians who failed to engage were named and shamed. They should be so very ashamed of themselves. Mohab says, thank you so much for the show this week with a fundamental topic about homelessness in Scotland. Mr. Colin, you are doing a great job. And so say all of us here on the show. Now to this week's show. For those of you who are unable to attend the hustings in person, which took place in Glasgow Woodside Halls last Saturday, we thought it would be a good idea to record it so you can get the opportunity to hear from both Ash Regan and Kerry McCaskill. So over to the hustings, ably chaired by our returning officer, Mike McKenzie. And we'll see you next week.
Good afternoon. I thought I'd take the opportunity to use the microphone. There's a few more people here than there was, and it's a much bigger room than it was last night. And last night after I left, I had a bit of a sore throat. So if I'm going to survive this next week, I thought I'll use the microphone. So I don't have a really formal speech for you. I thought because we are a fairly small group, I'll just keep it informal. I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about myself for those of you that maybe don't know me very well or don't know much about my background, because sometimes that comes up. What I see as the challenges that are facing us as a party, and how I think we should go about meeting those challenges, facing those challenges, so that we can have the most success possible as a political party. So I'm actually from South Lanarkshire, which most people don't believe because they don't think I sound like somebody from South Lanarkshire. But I was born in Lanark and I lived in Biggar until I was 10, and both my parents are Glaswegians. My dad died when I was young, he died when I was 18, but my mum, I think, went to school in Woodside, so she's from quite near this area, although she doesn't live in Glasgow now, but she did for a long time. I lived in England for 20 years, so I moved down there when I was quite small. I think I was 10, 11 years old, and I didn't come back to Scotland until I was in my 20s, so I've spent quite a lot of time living in England and also briefly in Australia. I was the first person in my extended family to go to university. Both my parents don't have any qualifications whatsoever. They both left school, I think, around about the age of 15, as you could in those days. They were keen to get out and get working. So they were very proud of me going to university. I did international relations as my undergraduate degree, and then later on in life I went back and I did a master's degree in something called development management. And that is actually the study of how you run and develop countries for the benefit of the people that live in them. So that seems like it might be quite relevant now. My main passions in politics are Scottish independence and women's rights, which probably won't come as a surprise to anybody here. And I was a full-time campaigner in the independence referendum, which I very much enjoyed. I absolutely loved being able to get out, talking to people about the benefits of independence. And then you'll know that once I was elected to the SNP, I was a minister, and then latterly I made the decision, not without a significant amount of thought, that I absolutely could not vote for the gender reform recognition bill as it was at the time. And so I resigned as a minister, which is very unusual. Very, very few people have ever done that. Most people, ministers that resign, it's because there's an imminent scandal about to break, not because they don't agree with a policy and they think it's going to put women and girls in danger. So I stood up to Nicola Sturgeon. For those who weren't in the SNP at the time, in a culture where nobody did that and where that really was a career-ending move. So it does make me laugh when I see the odd person on Twitter saying that I'm, a careerist. And I think, yes, because obviously if you're a careerist, you resign from government and stand up to Nicola Sturgeon. So I left the SNP though because I was just utterly fed up with them on independence. I could just see they had no strategy to get there, and I was also very upset about their lost the mic, I think, lack of progress on creating an environment for women and girls where they're safe. So, challenges in terms of the party. I think we should have possibly had this leadership contest maybe a couple of months ago, because we are coming up so close to the next election. We now have only 11 months until the beginning of the long campaign. So it is absolutely essential that we as a party come back together and we have complete focus, eyes on the prize, on getting ourselves elected into that parliament. We were polling quite low, so really from the time the parliament was set, time the party was set up, it really, I'm going to stop using this because it's really distracting. The party was really polling before I joined on about 1 or 2%. That is not enough to get any seats at all. Really need to get it up. So once I joined, having something in the Scottish Parliament has made the polls have gone up, and we are certainly getting into the realms of electability roundabout now. I think 2026 is very key for the party. I can't see us really surviving very long if we don't get anybody elected in 2026. We have to get people elected in 2026 in order to continue as a political party, and we have to get media in order to do that. And it's very difficult to get media as a small party, and it's very difficult to get media when you're outside the parliament as well, because really the only game in town is what's going on in there. Thank you. And I think as well it's a different kind of campaign. So perhaps the kind of political campaigning that some people are used to. Things are moving on. Politics is changing very much. The younger people who we know are very much pro-independence, they don't read the newspapers, they don't watch the news, they don't even watch a big screen telly. Everything's on phones, it's all social media, it's about communities online, it's about TikTok. So the party needs to think about who would be good at tapping into that and making that pitch for the party in this sort of new media. So if I become the leader, I think we need to maximise the reason the party was set up. We are an indie maxing party. We are there to get as many pro-independent seats in that parliament as possible. Not just because we want seats and we want to get elected and we want power, but because we want to use it to push for independence. We want to keep the SNP's foot to the fire. We want to absolutely roast them on independence, which I've been trying to do in the parliament as much as possible. But we really need to be in the room in order to do that, in order to make that pitch to the public. In order to get the media to put your message out to the public, you need to be in the room of the Scottish Parliament. And you'll have seen that. So you'll have seen that over the last year, I am constantly in the news for positive reasons, right? Making that case about the things that people in ALBA and the public care about. So just to give you an example, well, I'll come back to that maybe because I'm probably running out of time. Am I running out of time? Yeah, okay. So I think we should have a very, very simple message to the public because they quite often are only able to sort of remember, fairly a small number of things. So my suggestion would be that we put forward about 3 points to the public as our election pitch. So we talk about our independent strategy, because we're the only party, quite frankly, that really has one right now. We talk about the protection of women and girls. I'm almost finished. And we talk about putting more money in people's pockets. I believe we need to turn the page now on the party. We need to get serious about putting our message out to the public. And we can be the kingmakers of the next election. And if you put me in charge, we will be.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'll start off without the mic and see how it goes. If there's anybody's finding difficulties, let me know and I'll have the mic passed along. As I said at Alex Salmond's memorial service, the dream shall be delivered. I marched with him on his journey and I intend to conclude it. And that's why we're here today. That is the purpose and raison d'etre of ALBA. We've been given a great legacy by Alec. The strategy in 2021 was correct. There are times in elections when you can get your strategy entirely wrong and you get the result you deserve. There's times when you can get your strategy right and it goes well and you get the result that you're also entitled to. And there's times when you can get your strategy right, but the timing and the context of the election is just not there. And that's what happened to ALBA in 2021. We were late out the stocks, there was the overhang of COVID, there was the hostility of Nicola Sturgeon towards ALBA 2, SNP 1, promoting SNP 1, SNP 2, when they were told it would simply hand over votes to the Unionists and even preferring SNP 1 Green 2. So as I say, that tied in with the smear that Alec was sadly still having to endure, resulted in us not making the breakthrough. But times have changed, and that strategy of going for the list, maximising the independence vote is what we require to do, and that is what I seek to do, lead and campaign. How do we do it? Well, we have to have the how and we have to have the why. Because at the present moment, there is a great deal of support for independence. You can go from 52%, sometimes it's 48%, it's in that, it's young people, it's even people who now regret that they voted Unionist and Better Together in 2014, they've learned the hard way. But they don't see it as practical or relevant. And I think of the discussions I have with the young shop stewards at Grangemouth Refinery at the present moment. Every one of them voted yes, every one. Some of them are out campaigning day and daily for yes. But they'll say to me, but Kenny, independence, it's not on the agenda, and like, it's just not there, it's not happening. They don't see it as relevant, they don't see the need for it, and that's why we have to have the how and the why. The how is the plebiscite election. We have to make sure that every election, a vote for ALBA is a vote for independence. It is a mandate for independence. Not to go, pretty please sir, can we have a section 30 order? It is a basis for negotiation for independence. That was the policy when I first stood for the SNP, and it certainly has to be our policy now. They've decided there's no referendum. That's fine. We use the elections that are put in front of us. But we also have to have the why. Because the problem at the present moment is, would you like a nice hot summer? Absolutely. Would you like Scotland to win the World Cup? Definitely. Would you like Scotland to be a nation, independent country? Aye. But we don't actually see, and certainly those young men and women at Grangemouth Refinery don't see that as coming. That's why we've got to explain why it's necessary. It's how we're coming about it, but why it's necessary. That is made by energy, because we are energy rich, and half of our people are in fuel poverty. We have turbines turning onshore, we have turbines turning on the hills. I'll be down Dunbar Harbour with my dog later tonight, and I can see them out in the Firth of Forth. That's just the first 30. There are going to be hundreds, and yet people in Dunbar, never mind here in Maryhill and elsewhere, can't afford to turn on their heating. We're a major oil producing nation and we're about to see our only oil refinery shut. Syria is war torn, produces less oil than Scotland, and it's going to have a refinery capacity. It is perverse. So energy makes the key, because I saw an SNP MSP and a minister being delighted to go to the opening of a subsea cable from Torness, it was in my constituency of East Lothian, taking £2.5 billion worth of energy south. He was delighted. Where's the revenue? There's none. Where's the businesses and jobs? There's none. Where's the cheap energy? It's not there. There's a few bobbies for for a couple of community councils. They'll be able to build a swing park and put up a few park benches. It's very nice. But we should be having jobs. We should be having businesses locating there. And we should have pensioners and poor folk able to turn on their heating, not to watch turbines turning on hills or on land. So we have to make the case that independence is needed, and it's needed now to stop deindustrialisation. Because the tragedy of Grangemouth is not just these young lads and lasses that are going to lose their jobs. It's future generations, because tens of thousands got trained there. Energy makes the case for business, it makes a case for tackling poverty, and it makes a case for Scottish independence.
So the first question from somebody who lives in Helensburgh: what are your plans for the Trident and Fastlane base after independence? Ash, would you like to go first? Or would you another second? Second. Kenny?
It has to go. That is non-negotiable. There can be no replication by any Scottish government, as we saw a Spanish government sell out on NATO. We have to ensure that Trident is removed from the Clyde. It is simply unacceptable. There's no moral argument, there's no military argument, there's no economic argument for Trident. It goes.
I would agree with that utterly and completely, but I would also add that I think we might need to have a think about what we do with people that work there, and potentially seeing if there's another way we could keep those jobs but move them into something else. So I would like to also make sure we do that too.
What's the solution to the housing crisis? Ash, would you like to go first?
Would you believe that we have got a housing bill going through the Scottish Parliament this year that doesn't build any houses? I think the government, the government had done fairly well in this, and they certainly had done a lot better than the previous Labour administration in terms of the number of houses that they built. But it's quite a complicated picture. I am a fan. I had two grandparents that lived in council houses. They never bought them. When they died, they gave them back so that another family could use them, which I thought was great. And I would like to see us moving back to something akin to that, so perhaps a national housing company. Because what's happening at the moment is when the government puts up funding for housing, it's not, a lot of it is going into housing that the government or the local authority never owns. So we as the Scottish people are funding this, but we don't get to own it. And the costs are really spiralling. So what's been touted as affordable is often not very affordable. You can see the prices. I mean, obviously I represent Edinburgh. The prices in Edinburgh are absolutely insane. Somebody was telling me recently that when they moved to Edinburgh 5 years ago, the rent for a two-bedroom place was about $700 a month. Now it's £1,500 a month for private renting. I mean, I don't know who can afford these prices. So we need to do better. We need to invest more in it. We'll look at different models for how we're producing it. And I would like to see us investing in a housing stock that the country owns, that we can keep as an investment so that we can house our people properly.
To build council houses. We were right as a government when I served in it to stop the sale, because that was just undermining the stock. But the solution is to build council houses. It's not rocket science. It was done by John Wheatley 100 years ago, and people still live in Wheatley houses, and they're right good houses. They've got gardens. A council house doesn't come anywhere, never mind a Cala house gets nowhere near having a garden that size that John Wheatley did. So it's building council houses. We've got lots of Barrett and Cala and Taylor, by all means, but we have to invest. Alec Neil actually had a plan, and the tragedy is the Scottish Government has been making some progress, but nothing like as necessary. And it's not about affordable housing to rent. We require council houses. As the former Chief Executive of East Lothian Council would say to me, there's good reasons for building council houses. It creates jobs, it provides accommodation and homes, and it also creates revenue for the council. It's a virtuous circle, and the people who live in the council houses spend their money at the local shops and send their kids to the local schools and use the facilities. So we have to do in the 2020s what John Wheatley started off doing in the 1920s. Alec Neil had a plan. The Scottish Government should have implemented it.
In 2014, the writer suggests that the working class people of Scotland were mobilised. Can I ask each of the candidates how they would mobilise the working class people of Scotland? Kenny, would you like to?
We have to keep doing what we're doing. I think, you're right. I was driving through Craigmillar that I used to represent, and Ash now does. I have to say I remember 2014 there. People were queuing up to go and vote. There was a piper, because I remember Kezia Dugdale complained to the police that it was harassment, because a piper was leading a lot of the population down to vote. Many of them who had never voted before. They were mobilised and galvanised, and I saw a yes sticker billowing in the wind, and it looked rather sad, because 2014, since then, we have allowed the yes movement to be demotivated and demobilised. Something was always going to happen when you lose. That always happens. You take a kick, and it was a right kick. It depressed me. But the dead hand of the SNP has tried to close down the yes movement. If they couldn't control it, they didn't want it. And that's why we've seen people battle against the elements to try and maintain the yes campaign. So we have to give our support to the All Under One banner. We have to give our support to Hope Over Here. We have to give our support to all the independent yes campaigns and groups that are out there. We need to get them together. It's too late for a convention now that should have taken place after 2019, which should have been how do we get out of Boris Johnson's Britain. But we need a convention to bring forward and bring together the yes movement. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But it can be delivered again, because the people in Craigmillar will know that actually that's what's needed. And the tragedy of Alex Salmond, and I said it in that memorial, it was an email that came in from a senior official in East Lothian Council who I didn't even know had voted yes. And he said he made our people walk tall. We have got to get that mood back there. So how do you do it? You get out, you get up, and you get into them.
Yes, I've spent a bit of time like Kenny over the last few years maintaining those connections with the independents, the various different independence groups, speaking at rallies. I even went to one on Skye, I think it was either last year or the year before, which was a really nice experience. So I think that's important that we maintain our links with those groups, but you can see it is starting to dwindle down now. And I think the reason for that is that there's no immediate opportunity to vote for independence on the horizon. So I think people just think, well, there's nothing happening right now. We'll just go on with our normal lives until the pro-independence parties wake up and do something. So the 2014 Indie Ref, will live on in my campaigning and my political memory that summer, where it just felt like everybody wanted to talk about Scotland. Everybody was talking about currency unions and borders and all of that. It was incredible to have such a politically educated population, and how engaged people were, and also how engaged the teenagers were. That was a bit that surprised me, was seeing how excited these 16-year-olds were to go and cast their vote for their country. It was really something to see. We were holding, we had a moment there, didn't we, where we were holding the sovereignty of our country in our hands, just for that moment, just for those 12 hours or whatever it was. Now, people, I believe, will crawl over broken glass to get to vote if you give them something to vote for. The problem is, I think, for the SNP at the moment, they're not giving people enough to vote for. So it's our job as a political party to work out what it is the public want, not to decide what we think they want, because sometimes those two things are not the same, and to really be committed to giving the public something very positive to vote ALBA for. We obviously have our independence strategy, so that is where we are going to use the next election. And if we get over 50% for all the pro-independence parties, then if the SNP are too scared to do it, I'll go down to Westminster and negotiate Scotland's exit from the UK. We should set up a convention. You know, that has been a long-standing policy, both of the SNP, and I think both of us on this panel agree with that, to bring everybody together, because this shouldn't just be about political parties. This is about all of our futures. So it's something that we should all be involved in. And I tell you what else. That moment when we had that sense of sovereignty, and that whole summer where we were campaigning for independence, that is the most confident I ever remember people in Scotland being about themselves. And I want that back, and I think Scotland deserves to have that back.
Next question is, do you support the sovereignty without caveats of the Ukraine people?
Is it me first?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I was looking a little bit this morning because obviously we got asked about Ukraine again last night and about this idea of, you know, how do we get peace? Because I think that is what we all want. I don't know about you guys, but I was very perturbed, I think is probably the word, watching what went on in the White House with Zelensky. And I think we all need to prioritise how do we get to peace there. Now, we're in a bit of a different geopolitical situation right now. I think the world is changing. The risks are very much escalating. We've got these kind of, I don't know if it's a good way to describe them or not, but it's sort of like these bully boy personalities across the globe that are exerting this huge amount of influence. I think we have to understand that power, military might, authority, that does go a long way in these things. But I also think there's a role for Scotland here. And I wonder if, you know, Scotland is known for, you know, being able to promote diplomacy. And I wonder, I don't agree with the people that think that we should ban Trump for visiting. I know we don't like Trump. I'm the same. I don't agree with a lot of the things he says. But if there's an opportunity there for Scotland to play a role in diplomacy, to perhaps if we could get Trump, you know, if he does come on a state visit to Scotland, I know he has a very high regard for the King, there is a possibility there, and maybe there's some way to go. But yes, I support Ukraine, and I really hope we can get to peace as soon as possible.
Yes, of course. The sovereignty of every nation has to be respected. It's a breach of international law, and the invasion by the Russians has to be condemned unreservedly. That said, I have from the very outset called for peace based upon the Minsk Accords, which Zelensky refused to sign up for and sadly was encouraged by Germany, France, and indeed it would also appear spiked by Boris Johnson. And actually the Minsk Accords, one, said that sovereignty of Ukraine would be assured. 2, Ukraine would not join NATO, which they now accept they shouldn't. And 3, that there would be federalism or devolution for the Russian-speaking enclaves within there. So I think the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people requires to be accepted. That is what we have to work towards. I think they've got themselves into a dreadful situation, but we need peace because the escalation is very, very dangerous. I have to say I disagree with Ash, not simply on President Trump's visit, on that in particular. How Trump handled Zelensky was shameful. It really was bullying, and it is a dangerous escalation, and has been playing into President Putin, who is not nice. But I do not support a visit by President Trump, and let me be quite clear. There are 2 reasons. You look at the individual and you look at the office. The individual, I believe, demeans the office of the President of the United States, so you're not inviting him here because you think he's a swell guy and he should be looked after. The office of the President of the United States has to be respected. It is the most powerful country in the world and the largest economy. It is a country that has been a good friend to Scotland, and I have many friends there, and I love to visit the land. I actually am a big Americanophile. But where President Trump is going is simply unacceptable. And let's remember, he's coming over to speak to the King. He'll be looking to sell off a trade deal, not just work out what he wants in Ukraine. And believe me, a trade deal with the United States, chlorinated chicken will be the least unpalatable aspect of a trade deal with the United States. It will see the privatisation of the back offices of the NHS and the undermining further of our society. So President Trump, no. There is a time to negotiate, there is a time, and his office has to be respected. But as for bringing him here and fawning at him with him, whether at Balmoral or elsewhere, not for me.
Next question is, what can be done to re-establish single-sex services and single-sex spaces for Scotland's public services. And I think we would add to that maybe general observations on self-ID for gender and sex issues. Kenny, I think it's your turn.
I think you have to roll back the Stonewall agenda, which has frankly simply been bonkers. The situations were fine before. If it ain't broke, why change it? All of a sudden this agenda came in with some idea that we have to have these unisex toilets. One of the major issues that I got correspondence from in East Lothian as the MP was unisex toilets at Musselburgh Grammar. And quite right too. And it wasn't coming from mums or even girls, it was coming from granddads and others who were saying this is simply unacceptable. There was no requirement for that. And as I say, that agenda has been pushed in schools, it's been pushed elsewhere. We know from reading Helen Joyce's book that actually they started off in the prison service because they thought if they could work it out there, then they could cascade it down anywhere. So that agenda needs rollback. We need to respect both sexes, and we need to also respect privacy and women's rights, especially when we're on International Women's Day.
But are you going to tell them, Penny, who let the men in the women's prisons?
It wasn't me.
It was.
No, it wasn't. That is simply not true.
So I've spent a significant part of my professional career working on this, as many of you will
Can I
know.
come back in that?
And I'm glad to
Can I
do
come
it,
back in
and I'm
that?
proud to do
That's
it,
not
and I think
true.
it's important work. But I have to say, it's very frustrating as a woman who has watched the women before me work so hard to get women's rights to where they are, to spend so much time, energy, money and commitment in order to just stand still or even to stop things getting rolled back. So I think the women here will understand what I'm saying about that. So self-ID was obviously brought into Scotland by lobby groups. Nicola Sturgeon seemed to be very, very taken with it. Nobody can really no one's ever really got to the bottom of why she went into this so wholeheartedly. But it obviously is not the law in Scotland. So it did go through the Scottish Parliament, which in my opinion was, I would say, the lowest day of the Scottish Parliament when that legislation got voted through by a majority of parliamentarians who I believe, did not understand the issues appropriately, which is their job, to be honest. The problem now is that the government had obviously spent quite a lot of time before self-ID law was anticipated, obviously, to go through the Parliament and then go on to become implemented as law, promoting this, I believe, very dangerous ideology across the whole of the public sector. So that's schools, NHS, the prison service, everywhere, and also the third sector. And anyone that said they didn't agree with it, anybody that even raised questions about it, was bullied, intimidated, harassed. They were suspended from their jobs. They didn't get publishing contracts, and so on. Mostly women, but there were some men involved in this fight as well. It's an absolute unprecedented attack on people in Scotland who have stood against this rotten ideology. So just to give people an example, because I don't know how much everyone knows about this, but a couple of days ago, a human rights expert wrote quite a long letter, a very good letter, if anyone wants to go and have a look at it, to the First Minister through the context of women's human rights. So this is how she was kind of framing it up. So she was using the example that in these areas, so school toilets would be one, there are international obligations that say that boys and girls should have separate toilets. I think we can all understand why that's the case. So we've got a situation in Scottish schools, and this is happening now. I'm sure some of you know about it because you've got relatives that are going through this right now, where girls in Scotland do not want to use the loo at school. So they're waiting, obviously, potentially causing themselves health problems, and going out to the supermarket in their lunch break to use the facilities. This is absolutely ridiculous. We've got very dangerous men in the women's prison estate, which again is contrary to international human rights obligations, not just about physical safety, but also about psychological safety. Because if you're locked up with somebody, you obviously don't have the same ability as the rest of us do to make choices and to distance yourself to keep yourself safe. Changing rooms. Now this one has come up only a couple of weeks ago for anybody that was watching the Sandy Peggy NHS Fife case. This is making Scotland look like lunatics on an international stage. And not only that, the Scottish Government are actually paying money to argue this ridiculous position in the courts. And there's also international obligations on for victims of violence. So if you're a victim of violence, you are entitled to have single-sex provision if you go and get treatment. That's not happening in Scotland, and we know that because of the fuss over Scottish Rape Crisis Services, the Edinburgh Rape Crisis, who failed the tribunal on this very point. And also data collection. Sounds really boring, but if you don't collect the right data on who's committing the crimes and who's the victim of the crimes, it's very difficult to direct the right services, and it's difficult to make the right policies to make sure that you are going against this. So on Thursday, I stood up and asked the First Minister what he was going to do about the fact that women's human rights are being abused across Scotland, and it was state sanctioned. And he was very upset that I'd asked him that question. He got very rattled. But then what happened was he came out, and the media are all in a huddle outside the chamber. And basically I set the narrative for the media's questions. So the entire media huddle that were waiting for him outside then asked him my question, tried to press him on my question to get an answer. And then that went into the papers. So that spawned, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 stories across all the newspapers, because ALBA is standing up for women, and we are setting the agenda on this in Scotland.
I was asked to respond to a point that I asked me earlier, and I'm going to allow that.
Let's be quite clear about the position of men in women's prisons. I served as Justice Secretary from 2007 to 2014. I was privileged to do so. If you speak, and its comments have been made both by Tom Fox, who's passed away but was the head of communications for the Scottish Prison Service, and more importantly from Rona Hotchkiss, who was the governor of Cornton Vale and who I knew and visited, the Stonewall agenda that was being prepared in SPS was never put to ministers. So yes, plans were being made by an individual who was working, and indeed I was working after I came out of office with Kate Coleman, of Keep Prisons Single Sex, to ensure that we addressed that. Women in prisons came in not between 2000, and men in women's prisons not between 2000 and 2014. They came in, Ash, on your watch.
So we'll move on now we're going to move on to another question, and it's to ask each candidate what their views on immigration are.
Well, obviously immigration is reserved to the UK government, and I think we can agree that this administration, the previous one and the one before that, have been making a complete mess of it. I think there's often calls for Scotland to have their own immigration policy. I would support that. I don't think there's a cat's chance in hell the UK would give Scotland that. They don't want to do that. Even in the case of students, it'd be a great option. I believe we have argued for this, for international students that are coming to Scotland. They're very much enjoying their time here, for them to be able to establish themselves here, for them to start businesses, as many of them want to do, and stay in the country. Maybe not forever, but maybe for those few years after university. So I think Scotland should have its own immigration policy. I think it should be designed to make sure that we can get the best people who want to come in Scotland can come and live here and set up here. And I do think that the way that immigration has been handled by the UK government is just not working, either for Scotland, and it's not working for the UK either.
Today is not just International Women's Day, it's also been the day of the St Patrick's Festival here in the city of Glasgow. Scotland has been blessed by immigration, by people who have come to this country, whether from Ireland, whether from Italy, whether from the Indian subcontinent. They have made our country a better place, and we should be proud of them. I'm proud to be able to say, and I remember once being at a meeting in Georgia in the Caucasus when the translator just about had apoplexy when I said we were proud to be a mongrel race, to which he almost frothed at the mouth and I had to rechange what I was saying. We are proud of those who come and those who continue to come. We do have to have an immigration policy. There are issues and there are people who want to come to our country who we will not accept because they are criminal and they will harm us. But equally, we also have to remember that many who come here seek sanctuary. They need to get it because of the wars we have participated in, even if it wasn't in our name, and indeed the environmental damage that we've also caused with the Industrial Revolution. So we have to have our own immigration policy. If the UK had any common sense about it, they would allow the Scottish Government, even under a Labour administration, to carry out, as Quebec and South Australia do, an immigration policy. An independent Scotland needs to have an immigration policy that will ensure that it's those skills we need, who we do provide sanctuary for, and those who we don't want. But at the end of the day, because I know there's an immigration issue out there on the doorstep. Let's also remember, the biggest problem in Scotland's not immigration, it's emigration. That's why we've got immigration, because all of us, those of us of my age and indeed younger, can look at any school photograph, any school team that they played for, and they can say, he's in Manchester, she's in London, he's in Australia, they're in Canada. Over half of the teams I played in will all be gone. And of course, when Grangemouth closes and the youngsters go, we actually have to import them from abroad because we don't have the skilled fitters. So let's remember, immigration has blessed this country, and what we need to tackle is emigration and deindustrialisation, not focus on picking on a minority of people because of the colour of the skin or the religion that they choose to exercise.
I've had several questions on the general theme, and I know Kenny has touched on it in his opening speech, but several questions on the subject of energy. So I'm going to ask each candidate again to speak on that subject. Generally, Grangemouth, what we can do to secure its future, what we can do to secure Scotland's energy independence, and what we can do about the issue of fuel poverty. Kenny, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I actually think the maxim that Unite came up with is invest, extend, transition, and that applies. We do need to move away from fossil fuels as a society, but you can't do so overnight, and we cannot undermine North Sea as is being done by Ed Miliband and has been supported, sadly, by the Scottish Government in recent years. That is simply unacceptable. To be able to move towards a renewable future, you actually have to have plastics for the turbines, because they're not all metal, believe you me. We also have to have diesel to get the ships out to the River Forth or the Murray Firth or even out into the North Sea. We have to fuel the diesel for the trucks that will get them onto the hillsides. So we do have to transition for a better, safer world, because our world is suffering with the effects of fossil fuels. So what we have to do is to invest to make sure that we can get there. We have to take the benefit that we've got in the North Sea, but work towards this phase of moving towards that renewable future. And renewables are the way. Scotland has been blessed with a second natural bounty. We were blessed with North Sea oil. We should have had the wealth that Norway has, and yet now we're just picking up the tab and a P45 for workers at Grangemouth. But we've got a real bounty with renewable energy. For the first time in our country's history, our geography is to our advantage. All throughout the centuries, Scotland was distant from markets. It was easier to locate in the south of England or locate in Flanders. All of a sudden, we're where the energy is. Our weather, which we still complain about and long for a warm summer, all of a sudden, our weather is a blessing with the winds that blow and the hydro and everything else. So we have a huge gifted opportunity and natural bounty. At the present moment, we are not getting it. As I mentioned earlier with that SNP minister, where are the businesses? Where are the jobs being created? Because I look around, battery storage plants, they don't provide jobs. They store them here because they're unsightly. You could actually store them down south. If we don't get independence, then I can tell you what's going to happen. We're going to see our economy further damaged because they're going to take, the wealth out of here. We're going to see our environment damaged. Because one of the final meetings I went to at Westminster was the new Energy Supply Operating Company, a privatised venture, and they had a wonderful map of the United Kingdom. And their job is to make sure that you get the electricity and the energy from where it's produced to where it's needed. So what's going to happen? We've got subsea cables going down the west coast from Scotland down to England. We've got 2 subsea cables going from the east coast from Scotland down to England. They're going to put onshore pylons running right down the east coast of Scotland, ramming right through the borders to provide energy for Merseyside and Manchester. Now, we need to sell that energy because we've got more than we can use ourselves, but we should be getting paid for it. We should be manufacturing turbines. Every estuary in Scotland should be hammering away. We should be building the key supply chain jobs and we're not getting them. We should be getting the construction jobs and they're not coming. I look at the turbines from Dunbar Harbour and across on the other side where Neil Hanvey is, methyl and bifab lag empty. It's ridiculous. So we have to make sure that energy is to our benefit, not just in creating businesses and skills, which we should be, but also as the chief executive of Octopus, no supporter of the cause of independence, says, providing the cheapest energy in Europe for our people.
Yep, I'd agree with what Kenny said on that. We're absolutely being ripped off in Scotland in the way that our energy market is working as part of the UK. And we know that because we only need to look across at Norway to see how things could have been very different if we'd been an independent country from the 70s when oil was discovered, as it was in Norway at the same time. And there, well, it's probably more than that now, we used to talk about it in the INDEF, didn't there? Are there £1 trillion wealth fund that Scotland doesn't have, but Norway does have. So I've been working on Grangemouth 2 as part of the Scottish Parliament and trying to hold the Scottish Government to account. And I have to say, you would be shocked by how asleep at the wheel the SNP government ministers were over this topic. When I first started questioning about this, Neil Gray was the Cabinet Secretary, so that shows you it was a few months ago now because he's moved into health. And it was just this sort of slopey shoulders, oh well, it's a private decision and we can't really do anything about it. So I've consistently tried to be quite strong in the way that I've questioned them, really put them on the spot about it. And I have to say, I do not think that they have stepped up. The UK government have stepped up a bit. They've put forward, finally, after being, we've taken them to task quite a bit on it, particularly the ALBA party, I think have done well at that. And they've put forward an investment of £200 million odd. We haven't quite seen the detail of what's involved in that. But I would say, Grangemouth has been saved twice before. So Alex Salmond's government did that twice before. And yet it still doesn't have that kind of stability. It still seems to be quite fragile. So I think if we're going to invest public money into it again, and I think we should try to keep it, I would like to see a stake for the Scottish people taken in these kind of national strategic infrastructure projects and a bit more stability so that these things can be assets that go into the future rather than just lurching from one crisis to another. I'm going to get told to stop talking soon, so you can tell me when I've run out of time, but I think we should have a national energy company. I think that's what we should be doing in Scotland. I don't accept the Scottish Government's excuses that they can't do it. I think we can do it. I don't like the GB Energy. I think that's a complete swindle of the Scottish public by putting a nameplate in the northeast when none of the people work there. The chief executive, where does he live? Manchester? He's not going to be coming up to Scotland very often. And these jobs they're talking about, they're going to be maybe coming in 20 years. Are they? I don't see that at all. I think we should be supporting our oil and gas industry until we transition. The government's getting this wrong at the moment. They're sending out completely the wrong messages. There are communities all over the north and east of Scotland who rely on the people that work in oil and gas, who rely on that supply chain. And if we're going to use oil, we should be using our own oil in our own industry and not importing it at more environmental cost into a country while we've shut down our own industry and put our own people out of work. Doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So we should be doing the absolute maximum we can under devolution. And obviously, if and when we get independence, I would like to see us completely restructure this energy market. It's costing too much for people who are really struggling to pay their bills right now, and it's also really hamstringing businesses. If we want to have a flourishing economy, we need to get the energy market sorted out.
The next question is about the monarchy. So I'm going to ask each candidate what their views on the monarchy are. Should Scotland continue with the monarchy or become a republic? And is this question something we should deal with now, or should we leave it until after Scotland achieves independence?
Leave it.
Yeah.
Party policies for a republic, and I adhere to party policy. I wouldn't seek to change it in any way. We were prepared to accept Elizabeth. It was part of the position in 2014 that we would only change the government. There would be no change to currency, NATO membership, or indeed the royal family. The world has changed. Elizabeth is gone. I do not accept Charles as my king, and we need a Scottish republic.
I'm also a Republican. There was an opportunity to meet Prince Charles, when he was a prince, I should say. So this is a few years ago in the Scottish Parliament. I can't remember what the occasion was. And me, Humza, Kate Forbes, and quite a few other people were standing in the garden lobby waiting for him to come down the stairs. And we're all kind of standing like this. So he comes down the stairs, and obviously there's an opportunity to sort of do the meet and greet. And they all sort of step forward. And then I thought, I don't like the monarchy. So I stepped back and went and stood against the wall. So I did not take my opportunity to meet him because I didn't want to really. So I also agree. I don't think we should have a monarchy. I don't think that, to me, it doesn't sum up the way we would want our modern country to be. However, I do think this is an issue we should ask the public about, and I think we should do it after independence. Because my view is, the more, I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, but bear with me, the more we create conditions and the more tests we put on things and the more we insist that an independent Scotland has to be this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, the more people we lose, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to keep it as wide and open as possible. We want to let people who might like the monarchy vote for independence and then potentially give them a referendum on it afterwards, and then we do what the public want. The polling looks like the public don't want to retain the monarchy, so that's probably the way it would go. But my view is we make this an issue for the public to decide on, we respect the public's choice, and we do it after independence.
This question is talking about population decline as our biggest issue, but I'm going to combine that with another question which talks about the demographic trend, the ageing population. So I'm going to ask each of the candidates what their views are on population decline and the demographic trend are, and what they would propose to do about those issues. Yeah.
On population decline, we can see that families are very much changing. I've done my bit before anyone asked me. I've got 2 sons, they're 21, they're at uni. And I'm also contributing to the redhead population as well, because they've both got red hair, and that's important in Scotland. I think for many young people now, though, they look around and they just think, how can I afford to have children? You know, they look at the price of accommodation, they're not earning that much in their job. Childcare, I mean, you know, the Scottish Government have tried to improve the situation on childcare, but it really is not a good situation. You know, for many people, they're working, both of them are working, and one person's entire salary is going to pay for childcare. You know, who would want to sign up for that? It's just, so I think we've got to do a lot on housing. I'm going to certainly make this a part of our election pitch, should I become the leader, to keep people's bills lower so that they've got more money to spend on the things that are important to them. So housing, childcare, and I also think that the role of mothers in society, it's not very well regarded. And I think mothers do an absolutely amazing job, and I think we should spend a little bit more time being grateful to the women, the grandparents, and also the dads that spend so much of their time and energy raising the next generation.
I mean, one of the first ways is we have to tackle immigration, because the problem we face is a demographic problem that actually affects Western Europe. We're not the only country. If you look at Italy and other places. But it's a significant problem in Scotland because we're losing young working people, and many who are coming in are actually old retirees. Some from Scotland coming home for their retirement, others from elsewhere in the UK deciding to come and retire here because housing's cheaper and some of the public facilities provided by the government are better. So as I say, that is an issue. Equally, I think what we have to do is to be much more child-friendly. We have never been child-friendly as a society. We have never been the Italians and those of us who remember Scottish Sabbaths and what they were like. It was grim, but we do have to change. There are other countries that show what can be done. Sweden has a system that incentivises it. We have to make sure that it's not going to cost you an arm and leg, because childcare is frankly scandalous. Other than you paying for a mortgage or rent, young families will find that childcare is simply extortionate. Not simply that childcare is extortionate, sometimes it's even impossible to find it. So we actually have to have an investment in state-sponsored, state-supported childcare. That's what happens in Sweden. That's what's happened in Norway. So you have to make it affordable to have a child, and certainly move away from the actions of a UK government that disincentivise having children.
And we're now moving on to the summing up from each of the candidates. Any particular order?
I'll go first. Yep.
You happy to?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Well, thank you everyone. That was a great selection of questions. I hope you've enjoyed hearing what we've got to say on some of these issues. My view is very simple. I don't want to upset people, but I don't think that we can have continuity We can't go on with the way that we were doing things. We've got 11 months left. We don't have time for failure. We have to turn this around, and we have to start making a very positive, united front case to the public, because that is the only way that we are going to win votes and be successful. We have to broaden our appeal. So the people that liked what we were saying in 2021 and 2022, that was only 1 or 2% of the vote. That is not enough. In order to be successful, we need to broaden our appeal out. We need to get as many people listening to what ALBA have got to say and then considering giving us their second vote at the next election as possible. And I believe we have a good opportunity here. I think the election is going to be an interesting one. I don't think the majority of the public have made up their mind who they're going to vote for. So there's an opportunity here. It's not like it used to be when you could look ahead, look in the polls and see this party's going to get this party's going to get that. That is not the case for this election. We have everything out there to play for. So if we can put forward our positive independent strategy, which I believe, because I've been talking about it for the last 2 years, the public are starting to understand what I'm talking about there. That gives people that positive case to look forward to in terms of progress on independence. I think we also need to be talking about the attack on women's rights, because the public are starting to wake up to this big style. This is going to be a key battleground for the next election. And obviously, having somebody in charge of the party that is a women's rights defender, that the public know that they can trust on this issue, I believe could be very significant. We need to also talk about the cost of living crisis. We need people to feel that if they vote for us, they're going to get something. So we should be talking about putting more money into people's pockets. And we need to turn the page on what's gone on before. We need to make a positive, fresh case for what the ALBA party is and what we stand for. If you back me, I'll put everything into this in making us a force to be reckoned with in Scottish politics. And I believe that's important, because I think that the best legacy that we could have for Alex Salmond is for our party and the party that he started to be successful.
I intend to lead from the front and to lead the ALBA party in its campaign for Scottish independence. We have to get out, we have to be visible, and it can be done. We have to target the independence vote, not any populist right vote. It's the independence vote that is there and that is looking for a home. People are scunnered by the SNP, they're scunnered by those who thought they could put their faith or trust in Labour, and at the present moment the danger is they are not going to vote. They support independence and they require to have a party to vote for, because the biggest section of the electorate that's growing fast is those who support independence but do not like this SNP Scottish Government and in their Green Alliance. So that's what we need to target, to mobilise that independent support. There's no quick fix, there's no elixir, but it can be done. I stood in halls round about here many years ago. Tommy Sheridan's not here with me, I know he's suffered a family bereavement. But people didn't believe we could take on and defeat the poll tax. I remember when we were aghast in the SNP leadership when Jim Siller said, we'll get 100,000 non-payers. 100,000 non-payers. We mobilised over 1 million people and we brought down Margaret Thatcher. I marched with Alex Salmond when we went into an independence referendum. Nobody thought we would get a referendum. Nobody thought we would come anywhere near it. That, after all, is why David Cameron gave it in the first place. We didn't win. We came damn close. Nobody should take away from how good that campaign was, how close we came to victory against the forces of the British establishment, tweets from President Obama, support called in from President Putin, big business lined up against us. But as with the poll tax, we mobilised the ordinary people of Scotland to walk tall, to feel good and to get out there. As I said at the beginning, and as I said at Alex's memorial oration, he's not able to deliver his dream. I intend to conclude the journey for him.